Any chance you'll cooperate with Special Counsel Robert Mueller if he asks?
You know, that's a question I'd have to determine after my attorneys have some discussion. If there's wrongdoing by other people in the campaign that I know about, which I know of none, but if there is, I would certainly testify honestly. I'd also testify honestly about any other matter, including any communications with the president.
Wow. Indicted former Trump advisor Roger Stone not ruled out the possibility of cooperating with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Meanwhile, new analysis from the New York Times found that Donald Trump and his associates had more than 100 contacts with Russians before the inauguration. The analysis found the contacts between Trump and at least 17 campaign officials and advisors were with Russian nationals and WikiLeaks or their intermediaries. The contacts included more than 100 in-person meetings, phone calls, text messages, emails, and private messages on Twitter. Among the president's own contact was the letter of intent he signed for a Trump Tower in Moscow, despite tweeting, quote, "I have zero investments in Russia," and, quote, "I have nothing to do with Russia, no deals, no loans, no nothing," and saying this at his first White House news conference.
I have nothing to do with Russia. To the best of my knowledge, no person that I deal with does.
Nothing. The Times says its analysis has been based on its own reporting, documents submitted to Congress, and court records and accusations related to the special counsel investigation. So many questions. Joining us now, member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, also with us, former Justice Department spokesman, now an MSNBC justice and security analyst, Matt Miller. Good to have you both. Joe?
Good morning.
Matt Miller, let me start with you. I don't know if you ever saw BBC's retake on Sherlock. I mean, it's extraordinary. There's this moment where Sherlock's brother Mycroft says, "And what do we think of coincidences, Sherlock?" And Sherlock says, "The universe is rarely so lazy." So here we have 100 meetings with the Russians before the inauguration. We have members of the Trump team lying repeatedly about those 100 meetings with Russians or Russian-influenced people. And here we find ourselves at the end of an investigation, or possibly near the end of an investigation, and it's just impossible to come to the conclusion that all of this is a coincidence. There's something there. Of course, the question is, what is it? But the sheer number suggests it's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's obviously extraordinary, and the president's remarks that we just played, and once he took office, were obviously a lie. They had a number of contacts with the Russians. He was trying to do business in Russia while he was running his campaign. His campaign manager, his son-in-law, his son were meeting with Russian intermediaries who it seems were sent on behalf of the Kremlin. So they had extensive contacts, and we found out about more contacts on Friday when we found out that someone, a very senior official in the Trump campaign, reached out to Roger Stone to ask him to get in touch with WikiLeaks and find out what was coming next. So they had extensive contacts. And I think the question that we still don't really know the answer to is, why all the lying? You know, there are a couple of reasons you could be lying about this. The worst reason, obviously, is because you know there was a massive conspiracy from the top, executed all the way down, to participate with the Russians in the hack of emails and the release of stolen emails. The less benign, maybe not criminal, but still, you know, quite toxic politically explanation would be they're lying because the political scandal is just too damaging, and they didn't want any of this to come out, even if they didn't cross the line into committing a crime. And I think that's the question we kind of need to focus on if we are getting to the end of this investigation. We are going to see evidence of crimes that were committed. We keep seeing more and more evidence of crimes that were committed. But then there may be other evidence of behavior by the president and behavior of people around him that doesn't quite rise to the level of criminality, but is still far, far what you expect from people in the highest office in the land.
Congressman, we have now, of course, and you're going to be investigating this. We have now, though, direct evidence we just showed on TV, and there's so much more of it, but of the president lying about his contacts with the Russians. We have the vice president on tape lying about the campaign's contact with the Russians. The Attorney General, former Attorney General, lied in testimony before Congress about meetings with Russians. His son lied about a meeting with Russians in Trump Tower. His son-in-law lied about meetings with Russians and didn't put it on the disclosure form. His national security advisor did the same. I could go on and on. All the president's men have all lied about meeting with Russians. What do you do? Well, I mean, there's so many different directions that your committee could go in, but you know, where do you start?
Well, Matthew's right. I mean, that's the big question. I mean, it's no longer a news story that people, including the president, are lying. The president lies on Twitter pretty much every single day. But the fact that everybody is lying and going to jail for lying, these are not innocent lies. You know, Roger Stone, most of the counts against him are for lying to my committee. You don't make those lies, I think, unless you're defending something. And Matthew is right. I, having sort of been in and around this investigation for some period of time, there's nothing about the Trump people which suggests that this is a highly calibrated, well-executed, massive conspiracy. They don't seem to work that way. I think it's much more likely that, you know, there was an understanding within the team of what the president's objectives were with respect to the building in Russia. And the question is, I think the big remaining question, because we're way past collusion, right? If collusion each other out. There was lots of helping each other out. The question is, was there coordination and quid pro quo? Is Michael Cohen or Roger Stone or anyone else, the president, on record as saying, hey, if we do this, we will get that? That's when you move from collusion, amongst other ways, that's when you move from collusion to criminal conspiracy. And I think that's the remaining shoe to drop out of the Mueller investigation.
Casey.
Congressman, to that point, were you surprised at all, and this has been Roger Stone's defense, that in this indictment he is charged with lying to investigators, with lying to Congress, but he is not charged with conspiracy or collusion-related items? There are no things that Mueller discovered that he has laid out in that indictment. Were you surprised by any of that, and do you buy that that may exonerate him in some way?
Well, it certainly doesn't exonerate him in any way. I mean, remember, Michael Cohen is going to prison for lying to Congress. You know, Michael Flynn, Manafort,
Sure.
all of this lying is not just a small misdemeanor. You don't get to lie to federal officials, particularly, again, this is not jaywalk
Right.
across Main Street. This is serious stuff.
But the point is, you know, I mean, the president continues to say no collusion, calling it a witch hunt, et cetera, and this is Roger Stone's defense. Does it tell you anything as somebody who's been behind, in all of these meetings, in the testimony, that they didn't they didn't hit Roger Stone with a collusion or conspiracy charge?
Well, I think, again, remember, collusion is just working together. The question is, will there be criminal charges levied against anybody for conspiracy? And that, of course, that's the closing act of this drama, right? I don't think that, and again, we're all speculating on Mueller. None of us really know what he has, including the New York Times with their list of contacts to Russia. Nobody really knows what Bob Mueller has. But if there was, in fact, a conspiracy on the part of a presidential campaign to defraud the American people or to defraud the government, that, believe me, is the closing act. It's the fourth movement in that symphony, and I don't think it gets revealed around a character like Roger Stone or Michael Cohen. That is the closing act of this whole thing. And by the way, we should be very clear, just because, just because everybody is lying doesn't mean that there's a massive Hollywood ending here. There could just be a whole lot of sloppy behavior, do anything for the boss. We kind of think the boss wants the building in Moscow. But again, to your point, your question, Casey, if that is out there, that is the closing act of this drama.
Yikes. Congressman, before you go, what's the status of your committee? Is it up and running? And are you able to actually do the work that you need to do?
Yeah, very good question. The answer is, as of this morning, it is not up and running. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, appointed the Democratic members to the committee. I am told that Kevin McCarthy is planning on doing that today or tomorrow. But yeah, it's high time we get underway. Forget about the Russia investigation. We have not done real oversight of our intelligence community for many months now, so it's high time we get working.
All right, Congressman Jim Himes, thank you very much.